A boy named Andrew buys a new camera and faces it toward his bedroom door. As he prepares for school, his dad, Richard, keeps banging on the door for Andrew to open it, but he refuses. He then informs his dad that he just bought a camera.
I bought a camera and I'm filming everything.
And he'll be filming everything that happens in his life. Richard suddenly stops banging on the door, and Andrew notices that his dad has left because he doesn't want to be caught beating his son on camera. Shortly after, Andrew heads over to meet his mom, Karen, who is very sick. As he enters her room, Andrew tells Karen to say hello to the camera, and she asks who's watching. Andrew says it's a lot of people from around the world, and Karen asks if she's not looking awful. Andrew says she's looking great, and Karen then tells him that the camera is nice. Following this, Andrew leaves the house and waits outside for his cousin, Matt, to arrive in his car. Just as he gets to Andrew's house, Matt picks him up and asks why he's now walking about with a camera.
I'm filming everything.
Filming everything.
Yeah.
Andrew says he's just filming things, and even though Matt doesn't understand this, he decides against asking any more questions. He then starts singing out loud while Andrew films him. As they're about to reach school, Matt tells Andrew about a new philosopher he's reading about. Matt doesn't seem interested in this, and after they arrive at the school, he leaves the car while his cousin says he'll stay back for a while. Andrew then walks into the school and continues filming his surroundings. As he keeps walking alone, a girl suddenly approaches him and tells him to vote for a boy named Steve to be student body president. Andrew says he already knows, and he just walks away. After a while, Andrew heads to the sports center to have lunch while still filming everything that's happening around him. The school's cheerleading squad is training at the same time, and as their leader sees Andrew's camera, she asks if he can stop recording them because it feels weird. Andrew apologizes for this and says he didn't really mean to film them. As he can't seem to explain himself well, Andrew quickly takes his camera away and heads into the school building. There, some bullies see him with a camera and wonder what he's doing. They also take the camera from him, and after looking at it for a while, they kick it toward him. Andrew doesn't look happy about this, but he refuses to say anything. Much later, he and Matt head home together, and inside the car, his cousin tells him about a party happening later that night. Matt doesn't sound interested because he doesn't like parties, but Matt says he needs to start attending a few of them. After convincing Andrew to change his mind, he finally agrees to go to the party, but Matt advises him not to bring the camera along.
Not take the camera to a party.
Andrew says he's supposed to be filming things, but Matt thinks it would look weird if he brings his camera to the party. Andrew doesn't think there's a problem with doing that, so Matt stops talking about it. Shortly after, Matt drops Andrew off, and as he heads home, he films his neighborhood as well as some thugs who are hanging out in the area. The thugs don't like the fact they're being filmed, and as they run toward Andrew, he quickly runs into his house. Later that night, Andrew checks out the things he recorded for the day, and he looks happy with the outcome. Suddenly, Richard enters Andrew's room and hits Andrew several times, after which he says that his son must always open the door whenever he wants to come in. Richard then leaves the room, but he doesn't know that the camera captured everything he did. Andrew doesn't look happy about what happened, but he just picks up his camera and leaves the house to attend the party Matt talked about. On their way, Matt complains about Andrew still bringing his camera, but he doesn't seem to care. As they then reach the party, Matt tells Andrew to make sure he has fun with other people instead of following him around. Andrew doesn't seem to like being around such a huge crowd, but he starts walking alone and filming people at the party. Shortly after, a girl named Casey shows up with her camera and asks Andrew what he's filming for. Andrew says he doesn't have a particular reason, but Casey mentions that she's filming for her blog. As they keep talking, Matt shows up and seems to know Casey. After they greet each other, Matt talks about how parties can sometimes be pointless, but Casey doesn't get why he's trying to ruin the fun. He eventually walks away, and Andrew continues filming everyone at the party. Shortly after, Andrew feels out of place, so he heads out and sits on the grass near Matt's car. While he's waiting to see if Matt shows up, Steve approaches him and asks if he can bring his camera to help film something. He says he's with Matt and that they just found something they believe should be filmed. Andrew doesn't sound sure about this, but Steve says it's nothing serious. dangerous and that he just needs to film what they found. Andrew finally agrees to follow him, but as they walk into the woods, he asks where they're going.
What are you guys doing out here?
Steve says they're almost there and that there are other people at the place who are also intrigued by what he and Matt found. Almost immediately, they see Matt standing alone near a hole, and Steve asks where everyone is. Matt says they're all gone, and he's the only one left. Following this, Steve takes Andrew near the hole, and as he films the top, they suddenly hear a strange sound. While Andrew sounds scared, Matt and Steve have already heard the sound before, so they're excited to hear it again. Andrew suggests leaving because they don't know what's happening, but Steve suddenly walks into the hole. Andrew looks shocked, but as he complains about it, Matt also follows Steve into the hole. Andrew thinks they're making a big mistake, but he eventually follows them. Andrew looks scared because the place is dark, but Matt and Steve tell him not to be worried. After a while, they find where the strange sound is coming from, and as they go closer, they see a strange glowing object. Matt and Steve tell Andrew to film it, but he notices that his camera is suddenly experiencing a glitch. As Matt goes closer and stares into the object, it changes its color. The boys are shocked by this, and Steve also starts bleeding. Matt and Andrew look worried, but as they wonder what's going on, the object reacts violently, and something appears to attack them just as the camera shorts out.
Turn it off.
Okay.
All right, Steve, you too.
The next day, Matt and Steve tell Andrew to set up his camera well so he can film what has happened to them. After he places it on the floor, the boys then show off their new telekinetic abilities, which they got from the object. Even though the boys experience nosebleeds while trying out their new powers, they don't seem to be worried, and they just keep testing their strengths to see what they can do. After a while, they then head to Matt's house, and Andrew uses his new powers to arrange a Tetris set. Matt and Steve are impressed by this, and they believe Andrew has already developed his powers better than them.
Because we're his mistress.
After the boys leave the house, they start wondering how they got the powers. Even though Andrew says he doesn't want to return to the hole, Matt and Steve believe it's the only way they'll truly understand what happened to them. When they get there, though, they see that the hole is now covered. As they wait around to see what likely happened, a cop shows up and tells the boys that they're not supposed to go near the hole because the ground is unstable. Following this, the boys leave the place, and while Matt heads in a different direction, Steve drives Andrew home. On the way, Steve asks why Andrew keeps recording everything happening in his life.
It records right onto the camera.
And he says he just likes it. Steve thinks it might put a barrier between him and people, but Andrew says he doesn't really care. Steve then asks about Andrew's dad, and he says he was a firefighter. He adds that Richard quit his job after he got injured, and now he spends most of his time drinking. Steve feels sorry for Andrew, and he says that his parents are also having a hard time. He initially doesn't want to talk about it, but he eventually mentions that he thinks his mom is cheating on his dad. Andrew sounds shocked to hear this.
I'm feeling pretty spelunked out, actually.
But Steve begs him not to tell anyone because he doesn't want people to hear about his parents' struggles. Later that night, Andrew uses his powers to control the camera and film himself in bed while he hears his dad complaining to someone on the phone about his wife's medication. Richard sounds quite angry because he has been asked to pay $700 for his wife's drugs, even though he doesn't have a job anymore. Andrew looks sad because he knows his mom is not getting the level of care she needs, but there's nothing he can do. The next day, Andrew takes his mom out, and as she lets him film her, she says she wants to remember him as a happy person. She also says he's stronger than he thinks, and that she wants him to repeat the words to himself. Andrew does just this, and after a while, he meets up with Matt near a stream. There, Andrew asks Matt if he likes him, and he says he does. However, he adds that it was really hard trying to talk to him first because he always behaved weirdly. Andrew doesn't get what he means, but Matt believes it doesn't matter anymore since they're now close. Andrew then asks if Matt has ever thought of using his powers for more things, but he says he has never considered it. Shortly after, they arrive at school with Steve, who starts making some findings about about telekinesis. As he talks about how they can do several things with their minds, the boys prank some girls at their school by moving an object next to them. During lunch break, they head to the sports center and talk about how they've gotten stronger over time. They also mention that they've not gotten the nosebleeds in a while, and Matt says he believes their powers only have side effects when they overexert themselves. After school that day, the boys head to a supermarket to prank people and make them scared by moving objects around them. The boys enjoy themselves while doing this.
It's like wanting to make things better for everyone.
And they don't seem to be bothered that someone might see them using their powers. Outside the store, Steve also moves a parked car with his mind, and his friends are excited about this, even though he experiences nosebleeds. Shortly after, as the boys joke about how their day went, a truck driver keeps honking at them to leave the road and stop driving slowly. Andrew thinks he's being rude, so he uses his powers to move the man's truck off the road. Matt and Steve cannot believe this, and they immediately stop the car to check what happened to the truck. Unfortunately, it turns out that there's a lake nearby, and the truck has fallen into it, with the driver still inside. Steve then jumps into the lake to see if he can save the driver. After a while, he brings out the man's injured body, but it turns out that he's still alive. Steve tells Matt to call the police, but as he does so, Andrew thinks they're making a mistake. Matt doesn't seem to care, and after the call ends, the cops don't take long to arrive at the scene to help the injured man. When they leave, Matt and Steve believe Andrew went too far by using his powers to nearly kill someone. Andrew doesn't say anything, but Matt mentions that they need to have rules. He then says that they should no longer use their powers in public or on living things. He adds that they can't also use it when they're angry. Andrew doesn't think Matt can just lay down rules for them, but he says that it's to make them more careful about how they use their powers. The next day, Matt picks up Andrew at his house so they can meet with Steve. On the way, Andrew notices that Matt is still angry about what he did the previous day, and he apologizes again. Matt says he's not pissed, and that he only wants them to now be careful because they're getting stronger.
Just think that we need to be more careful now, you know?
Shortly after, they reach a junkyard where Steve shows them that he can fly. Matt and Andrew are shocked by this, but he explains how he did it to them. Matt struggles to do this well, but Andrew uses Steve's technique and flies immediately. After a while, Matt eventually gets it too, and the three boys head to the sky to play around. The boys can't believe that they're actually flying, and they look quite excited about it. Suddenly, they hear a plane coming toward them, but as they wonder what to do, it flies right past them and knocks them off balance. Luckily, Andrew saves Steve just as he falls, and Matt also doesn't get injured. Steve then calls Andrew a genius and thanks him for saving his life because he could have nearly been killed. Later that night, while the boys sleep at Matt's house, Matt tells them that he had so much fun earlier in the day. He adds that he doesn't think he has ever enjoyed a day like that before, and he's grateful to his friends for making it happen.
The best day of my life.
The next day, the boys start talking about going on a vacation trip to a place called Tibet. Andrew thinks it's going to be a fun place where they can easily blend in because the monks in the area can also float in the air. However, Matt and Steve don't like the idea of going to Tibet, and they start suggesting other options. After a while, the boys leave for their different homes, but Matt goes to see Casey first. He then gives her some money that can be donated to the cause Casey is fighting for on her blog. Casey wonders why he didn't just give her at school, but she suspects that he only came to her house because he likes her.
Everybody else.
No. I would separate myself.
The next day, Steve and Andrew hang out alone while Matt is busy. As they sit on the ledge of a tall building, Steve sees Andrew controlling the camera with his mind, and he looks shocked. He then hails Andrew for always coming up with new ways they can use their powers. He says he can't do things like that yet, but Andrew offers to teach him how he's able to control the camera with his mind. Shortly after, Steve mentions that his mom no longer comes home frequently. He adds that his dad is still very quiet about the situation, and it's making him worried. Andrew feels sorry for him, and he says that their families are somewhat alike but still different in a couple of ways. He also mentions that Steve won't feel too sad about what's happening between his parents because he has many friends unlike him. Just then, Steve remembers that there's an upcoming talent show at the school. school, so he tells Andrew to register as one of the contestants. Andrew sounds unsure about this because he's very shy around people.
I don't know, it was actually a really good day.
But Steve assures him that things will turn out just fine. Andrew is also bothered because he doesn't have any talents, but Steve says he can try something out with his powers. The next day, Steve gives Andrew one of his suits so he can wear it to the talent show. After putting it on, Andrew shows his mom how he looks, and she likes it. As he's about to leave the house, Richard stops him and asks how he has been getting to school. Andrew doesn't understand this question, but Richard mentions that he hasn't seen Matt pick up his son in the past few days. As he implies that Andrew is probably skipping school, Richard says he'll catch him red-handed one day. Andrew then leaves the house and arrives at the school for the talent show. As it starts, different students showcase their talents, and the audience applauds them. After a while, Steve climbs the stage and introduces Andrew to the audience as a magician. Andrew then uses his powers to do a very impressive card trick that leaves everyone shocked. No one seems to know that he's using his powers, but they keep wondering how he's able to do his tricks. After the card trick, Andrew continues to impress the audience by climbing on a rope and walking on it. He also does several things on the rope, and this easily makes everyone love him. As he ends his performance, everyone applauds him, and he looks happy. After the show, Matt says he's so proud of Andrew and how he performed. He and Steve also take Andrew to a party where he realizes that he now has some fans. He also meets a girl who says she likes him. After partying for a while, things don't turn out as expected for Andrew and his new crush. As she angrily leaves him at the party after an argument, Steve asks Andrew what happened, but he refuses to say anything. He also angrily tells Steve to leave him alone. The next day, Andrew lifts a spider with his powers, but eventually kills it. As he then goes to check on his mom, who is in serious need of her medications, which her husband still can't afford, Richard sneaks into Andrew's room to see if his son is hiding anything. He eventually finds the camera and scolds his son for having an expensive camera, which he believes should have been sold to help raise money for Karen's medicine. Andrew doesn't say anything, but as Richard starts lamenting that his son only knows how to spend his money, he says he didn't use his father's money to buy anything. Richard insists that Andrew's school fees are paid with his money, but Andrew says he attends a public school that doesn't pay any fees. Richard sounds pissed that his son is talking back at him, so he attacks Andrew. As he keeps trying to beat his son, Andrew says he can just crush Richard if he wants. Suddenly, he throws Richard on the floor with his powers and looks into the camera strangely. Elsewhere, Matt starts bleeding at Casey's house, but as she asks what's wrong, he says it's nothing. Shortly after, while Andrew is flying at night, Steve meets him in the sky and asks why he's up there alone. Andrew says he wants to be alone, but as Steve sees a bruise on his friend's face, he asks if Richard has hurt him again. Andrew tells him to stop acting like he cares, but Steve says he actually does because they're best friends.
I don't have any friends!
Andrew doesn't think they're best friends because they only met a while ago, but Steve says it doesn't matter. As Steve keeps telling him that they need to head back down, Andrew refuses and angrily strikes his friend down with a lightning bolt that appears in the sky. This leads to Steve's death, and the next day, he gets buried. After the funeral, Matt asks Andrew what happened to Steve, but he refuses to say anything. Matt doesn't seem to understand how Steve could have been struck by lightning during a storm with no recorded lightning strikes. He also wonders why Steve was found in the middle of a field. Andrew refuses to say anything about what happened, and as Matt tries to get him to stop filming with his camera, he uses his powers to lift it above them. Matt then looks disappointed and asks if everything is a game to Andrew. He still doesn't say anything, and as Matt gets pissed, he walks away.
Joking right now? Is this a joke to you?
Later that day, Andrew visits Steve's grave and says sorry for what happened. He says he didn't know what came over him and that he just couldn't control himself. He also says he misses Steve and wishes nothing had happened to him.
Oh, sorry.
Following this, Andrew walks away to the place they found the hole the other day. The hole is still covered, and some grass has even grown over the place, so Andrew leaves. The next day, a bully named Wayne makes fun of Andrew at school, and he retaliates by removing some of Wayne's teeth with his powers. Everyone sees this, but they don't know what really happened. Andrew doesn't seem to care, and he heads to the restroom to film himself talking about the teeth he removed. He eventually throws them away and heads to a junkyard. There, he starts talking about how he has been doing a lot of reading about evolution and natural selection. He mentions that he read something about an apex predator who is the strongest animal in an ecosystem. He also says that it's why animals can't attack humans because they have weapons and other things that can subdue them. He adds that lions don't feel guilty when they kill their prey.
You do not feel guilty when you squash a fly.
And humans don't feel guilty when they kill a fly. As he says that it has to mean something, he uses his powers to squeeze one of the cars in the junkyard. Later that night, as he's about to head out to see if he can get his mom's medication, Matt shows up at his house and asks about what happened at school. Andrew says he's going somewhere, but Matt can't believe he's not remorseful about using his powers to hurt someone in public. As he argues about how it's against the rules they set, Andrew pushes Matt. This gets Matt pissed, but as he's about to fight back, Andrew stops him with his powers. Matt realizes that there's nothing else he can say to change how Andrew thinks, so he leaves. Andrew then heads to a pharmacy to ask for his mom's medication. Unfortunately, the pharmacist says he can't release the drugs unless Andrew pays for them. He adds that he has already told Richard the cost, and he didn't expect Andrew to come without the money. Andrew doesn't sound happy about this, and he leaves the pharmacy angrily. The next day, Andrew waits for Richard to leave the house before he goes to find his dad's old firefighter uniform. He then wears it and heads out with the intention of beating up people to get enough money to pay for his mom's medication. The thugs in his neighborhood are his first victims. And as he tells them to give him all the money they have, they try to attack him, so he kills them. He then takes their money, but after counting everything, he realizes that he's still a long way from the total amount he needs. Following this, he heads to a supermarket and attacks the cashier before stealing all the money in the cash register. As he leaves, though, the cashier brings out a gun and tries to shoot Andrew, but he deflects the bullet toward a gas tank. This causes an explosion, and he also gets caught up in the fire. After a while, Andrew is taken to a hospital, and Richard comes over to see him. As he sits near his son's bed, Richard cries and mentions that Karen is dead. He adds that she died when he was out looking for Andrew. As he blames Andrew for her death, he says he knows his son can hear him, and that he wants him to sit up and apologize for what he did. Andrew still remains unconscious, but as Richard starts shouting at him,
Selfish asshole.
he grabs his father's hand and blows off the entire window in his hospital room. Elsewhere, Matt suddenly starts bleeding at a birthday party, and Casey sees this. As she asks what's wrong, he says that Andrew is likely in trouble. Suddenly, the news comes on, and Matt sees a report about a bomb explosion at a hospital. He realizes that it's Andrew, so he heads out of the party, but Casey follows him. She also asks what's going on, but he says he doesn't know how to explain it. Shortly after, they reach the hospital and see a crowd outside, while Andrew flies out of his room and drops his dad to the ground. Luckily, Matt quickly flies up to save Richard, and Casey looks shocked. As they then leave the scene, she tries to understand what's happening, but Andrew suddenly picks up their car and takes it near a tower. Casey sounds really scared and tells Matt to stop what's happening, but he says he can't control it. As Andrew is about to blast them off at the top of the tower, Matt saves Casey and tells her to stay back down while he tries to talk to his cousin. After he flies into the sky, he tells Andrew to stop what he's doing because he's not really a bad person. Andrew then asks why Matt saved Richard because he wanted his dad to die. Matt says he's not being himself and that he needs to stop before things get worse. Andrew says he doesn't care what Matt thinks because he abandoned him while he was struggling. Matt says he didn't leave Andrew alone.
I'm here with you. I should have been with you all along.
And that they can still work things out. Suddenly, Andrew calls himself an apex predator and uses a bus to knock down Matt. Matt survives this attack, and as Andrew gets weaker, he falls to the ground. The cops arrive at the scene to arrest Andrew, but Matt tells them to stay back. As he tries to stop them from coming closer, Andrew slowly regains his strength. A cop then tries to shoot him, but Andrew uses his powers to throw the cops and their cars away. Andrew then flies flies away from the scene, but since he's still weak, Matt manages to bring him down again. As they fall together, the cops arrive at the scene and point their guns at Andrew. Matt begs him not to hurt them, but as they open fire on him, he stops the bullets and pushes them back toward the cops and everyone standing in front of him. He then starts breaking all the windows of the buildings around him. As he prepares to attack the cops and civilians again, Matt begs him not to do it, but doesn't listen. Matt then uses his powers to take a spear from a nearby statue to kill Andrew. He doesn't look happy about this, but as the cops get close to him, he flies away. Much later, Matt arrives in Tibet with Andrew's camera. He then records a video saying sorry to Andrew for what he did. He also mentions that he had to do it, and he hopes Andrew understands. He adds that Andrew is not a bad person, and he should know that. Matt then mentions that he wants to start helping people with his powers. He also mentions that he'll do whatever he can to find out what happened to them inside the hole. He says he'll do it for Steve and Andrew. Following this, he mentions that they've made it to Tibet already, and it's a beautiful place. As he then walks away, he says goodbye to Andrew and leaves the camera in the middle of nowhere while he heads to the Tibetan monastery. Andrew's powers got to his head and made him think he could do things without consequences. Despite his struggles, he had no excuse for killing Steve and nearly doing the same thing to Matt, Casey, and everyone in the city. His actions showed that when massive power falls into the wrong hands, it can lead to destruction, and no amount of justification can erase the harm caused.